We do need some wholesale change within the DNC because what is happening is not working. There's some elements who would have characterized that as a racist move, which I think is ridiculous. There was some polling that tested whether New Yorkers supported more cops in our subway system. And one of the highest polling demographics that supported more cops in our New York City subway system were Black New York City residents. People, right or wrong, fair or unfair, there are many just good people who were fearful of what was being discussed because they've been fed misinformation by the other side in this vacuum. You know, Utah, can't get much redder than Utah. The Utah government commissioned a study to look at how many transgender girls were participating in girls' sports in schools in Utah. You know how many there were in the entire state?
Hey guys, how's it going? I'm joined by James Skoufis, New York Senator. Thank you for joining me. You are running for the DNC chair.
I am. Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for chatting. I am a online influencer, YouTuber kind of dude. Obviously, the DNC is looking to branch out and chat with more of my types of people and then kind of communicating more to young people. And you are somebody who's running for the chair of the DNC, which is arguably one of the more important upcoming Democratic positions with no president. Yeah, tell me a little bit about, I guess, why you think, what do you even want to do there? Why are you running for it?
Yeah, well, we need to start winning again. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm sure the other candidates are running, and we have unique visions for what that looks like, right? And so I come from a district in the Hudson Valley here in New York that Donald Trump just won by 12 percentage points. I won re-election by 14. Trump has won my district now 3 times. If you go back to 2012, my first race, Mitt Romney was winning my district. And so, winning is not some theoretical exercise for me. I go out with my team and we do it every 2 years in really difficult terrain. But just as importantly, there are these 2 camps that have seemingly emerged following the election a couple of months ago. You have the first camp of folks, Democrats, who feel we were up against these global economic headwinds. We were up against these global anti-incumbency headwinds. We had a very short 107-day runway.
That's my camp. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
tell me why you disagree so much.
And that last point, by the way, is very true. Challenging circumstances. But the point in that, the takeaway from the first camp is we don't have to change much. Mm-hmm. A few tweaks here and there. We'll be back at them in a couple of years. I am decidedly in the second camp, and this is also in part why I'm running. I believe we do need some wholesale change within the DNC. We need to have a conversation about seriously reorienting how we message, how we approach campaigning and voters, because what is happening is not working. And some of it's prompted by 2 months ago, but a lot of it is really a long time coming. And look, you have to go back 16 years to 2008. That is the last time nationally we trounced in an election, that we dominated in a national election. And since then, we've either belly flopped, lost, like we did in a resounding way 2 months ago, or we've white knuckled it across the finish line, collectively across battleground states, won by 50, 60, 70,000 votes. And so, I am in a camp that wants to get back to the big coalition that we built 16 years ago. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of sweat equity, but it's going to take a DNC chair amongst many others who are going to go out and rebuild that coalition, know how to win. And I've lived and breathed that daily for the past 12 years.
So a man of the people who is running in a district that is solidly pro-Trump, not 1 point, not 2 points, double-digit points. What do you think is the big thing that you do differently that either other candidates are missing who are losing their races, and then nationally what the Democratic Party is missing?
So it's a few things, and none of it's rocket science. There's no proprietary special sauce here, but it first starts by showing up everywhere. And, I go to some of the most rural, reddest parts of my district in Western Orange County that are new to me from redistricting. And in 2022, the first cycle I represented them, I lost some of these communities by literally 30 to 40 percentage points was the margin. And this past time, because I showed up all the time, I delivered, I listened to them. We do a lot more lecturing than listening to sometimes as National Democrats with voters. We are telling people how they should be feeling, telling people what they should be thinking, what their position should be. And I don't do that. And so this time around, I didn't win some of those communities, but instead of losing them by 30, 40 points, I lost them by 10 or 20. And the folks there, they tell me consistently, not only are you the only Democrat that's doing something for us, you're the only Democrat that we see in our community. And
can I ask you, when you say like listening, what does that look like? Are you just doing like town halls, or are you doing what?
Yeah. So I do annual town halls every summer, but it's a lot more than that. It's literally me going into some living rooms, and there could be 5, 6, 7 voters, sitting around a kitchen table, a dining room table, and telling me about, some warehouse development that they're opposed to, and they want me to do something about it. And so, obviously the DNC chair can't be replicating that exactly across the country, but as National Democrats, we should be replicating that as at least a model. And so, what does listening look like? It means in the couple of urban centers I represent, where I overperform the top of the ticket in these majority-minority communities as a white guy who grew up mostly in the exurbs, I'm able to do that because I'm less interested in sorting voters into these academic buckets and more interested in finding out what their problems are. And by the way, most of their problems are not specific to them as a black woman or a Hispanic young male. Most of these problems, by the way, are problems shared by the entire electorate. But listening to them and then doing something about their issues and their problems, instead of telling them, like we did for the most part over the past 4 years, the economy is doing great. Bidenomics is working. And when they'd go to the supermarket the next day and find out for themselves, their own 2 eyes, they're paying double for eggs and meat and cheese what they were paying for 4 years ago. So, we've got to be real with people. We've got to, again, stop speaking in this language where we're pushing white paper talking points, telling folks what they should be believing, which sometimes comes off as us being more interested in running for, university chancellor than for public office sometimes. Listen to them and do something about their problems.
I'm curious, when you're messaging to Democratic voters versus like conservative voters versus independents, where is your mind at in terms of, like, one of the big debates is like, do we turn out our base? Do we try to pull independents over? Or do we turn off like conservative voters? Like, do you communicate to these people differently? Like, how do you change up, I guess, not to imply you have different positions, but like, what's your approach like to that?
Well, you can emphasize differently depending on what the room looks like. You shouldn't hold different positions. But if this lesson taught us anything, it's that the base and persuasion should not be mutually exclusive in these campaigns, because yes, we saw in a lot of the suburbs, a lot of the exurbs where there are many persuadable voters, we certainly lost ground there compared to 4 years ago. But also compared to 4 years ago, we saw a precipitous decline in turnout with some key elements of our base. Yes, there's a major problem with AAPI voters who have shifted away from us and towards Republicans and Trump from 4 years ago. But broadly speaking, among especially black voters and non-young male Hispanic voters who are not located, including also along these border communities, there was just really, they stayed home. There was a turnout problem. And I think in both instances, persuasion and the base, it starts by we stopped showing up in a lot of these communities for different reasons. The first, we stopped showing up for a long time because a lot of National Democrats, they don't want to be in those meeting rooms, in those town halls, those media outlets that maybe have traditionally been uncomfortable for them. For me, those settings are not only comfortable, but I embrace those opportunities. If I didn't, I would have lost by 15 points 2 months ago. The second bucket, the base, we've stopped showing up because we've taken them for granted. And so we have to be, as a DNC, as a national party, more broadly speaking, taking nobody for granted, and also going into those settings where consultants have sort of told us we should be writing them off and start rebuilding the trust in these communities that we've long lost.
When you talk to conservative voters who voted for you and for Trump, have you been able to get any of these people in a room and ask them, like, why? Like, what's the disconnect here? What's going on? Yeah.
One of the prevailing themes that I hear consistently from that bucket of voters is authenticity. And say what you want about Donald Trump. He is a liar. He is going to inflict tremendous harm on the American public over the next 4 years, just as he did in his first term. But no one can accuse him of being inauthentic. It's very clear he is not running every word, every sentence, every policy position, no matter how many times that position might change, through 19 layers of consultants and think tank folks and shopping around talking points to a campaign team. That's sort of my approach, except I'm honest with voters as well when I go out in my community, and I don't run away from issues that maybe are challenging for a lot of national Democrats vis-a-vis the border and crime and abortion when we're talking to voters that may not align with us on sort of the traditional positions that our party takes. And so I lean into those conversations. And when you look at candidates like Ruben Gallego, for example, in Arizona, who had the audacity, I would characterize it as the political courage, to break from the stale, DC-oriented talking points on some of these issues, he went out and sought and received the Border Patrol Union's endorsement, which for some in our party might be anathema, and had viewed that at the time as, there's some elements who would have characterize that as a racist move, which I think is ridiculous. But that's one of the reasons why he won when our top of the ticket lost in Arizona. So authenticity is really one of the main currents that I hear from those types of crossover voters.
For a lot of the social issues, it's very frustrating from my perspective as somebody that does online commentary and debate, because I have to kind of, I don't have to, but I agree policy-wise with the Democratic Party and value-wise generally with the Democratic Party, and it's very frustrating when they're afraid to tackle some issues that are, I don't want to say common sense, but it's like people will look at a black voter and think oh man, I can't talk about crime around this guy. And it's like you said earlier, we roughly all generally have about the same concerns. It's not like black people and Hispanic people and poor voters or whatever like crime in their neighborhoods, or they like these things. And it's very difficult sometimes for politicians to just confront some issues that are really challenging, whether it's around some of the social issues like the trans stuff or the abortion stuff or whatever. And when there's either no messaging on it or basically there's no messaging on it, and then there's no messaging on it, it's either the very farthest parts of our political movement, I'm saying in quotes here,
yep,
that tackle it, or it's just all the people on the right that talk about it and then ascribe it to you. It was crazy to me that Kamala got character assassinated so much over trans stuff from 2019, and part of it I think is I will express the frustration. She didn't even say this recently, but then a counter argument is, well, she didn't say anything on it recently, so what do you think? Yeah,
that's right. And one quick point on crime, in New York, we have been and it's been in the news a lot the last week or so, we've been dealing with crime, perceived and real, in our mass transit system, our subway system here. And there was some polling, this is a few years ago, that tested whether New Yorkers supported more cops in our subway system. And one of the highest polling demographics that supported more cops in our New York City subway system were Black New York City residents. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, there is, I think, this misconception because we do hear from the activist base, what some people might refer to as the fringe, who speak for these larger buckets, these larger demographics, and quite frankly aren't speaking accurately for them. But I do believe as a Democratic Party, we should be far more concerned with the second category of the problem that you just outlined. And the transgender conversation is the perfect, most recent example for it. This is obviously a set of issues that the other party is obsessed with. Yeah. And there's no debating that. You look at the TV ad buys, you look at the rallies, the Republicans and Trump are the ones obsessed with the transgender conversation, not us. Mm-hmm. But we, as a national party in many ways, ran away from the conversation and left this vacuum for the Republicans to fill. And living in the sort of traditional exurban subdivision neighborhood that I live in, surrounded by a lot of either apolitical or not political in a major way, neighbors that I live around would come up to me and they'd ask me, because they know I'm obviously the state senator involved in Democratic Party politics, what's going on with this transgender girls in sports issue? I have a daughter, she's about to go to college, is she going to get her lacrosse scholarship? And people right or wrong, fair or unfair, there are many just good people who were fearful of what was being discussed because they've been fed misinformation by the other side in this vacuum. And one of the first things that I tell them to calm them down is, Utah, can't get much redder than Utah. The Utah government commissioned a study to look at how many transgender girls were participating in girls' sports in schools in Utah. You know how many there were in the entire state? 1. In many ways, this is an extremely overblown issue to scare people. And so we've got to level set with them and help them understand that they're being scared by the Republican Party on purpose for political reasons with that motivation in mind. And so, I do believe that, and let me make this parallel, and then I'll turn it back to you, is 20 years ago, marriage equality was underwater with public sentiment. It was 60-40 against 20 years ago. The Democratic Party political class, from the Obamas to the Clintons, were not publicly supportive of marriage equality. We had to take that conversation to the American electorate in a very persistent and intense way, such that now, 20 years later, the default position in the Democratic Party is obviously supportive. We've changed the law in this country, and we had a landmark Supreme Court ruling, and public opinion now is 70-30 in favor. That doesn't happen by itself, and it certainly doesn't happen by running away from a difficult conversation.
How do you decide as a political candidate when you want to lead the electorate on an issue versus when you want to be listening to an electorate on an issue? Not that these things are opposed, but say that you are, the H-1B issue is very popular right now, and New York City, stuff having to do with illegal immigration is a very hot topic issue. How do you decide, okay, I hear what the public is saying and I need to change this thing about my actual maybe like policy position versus I hear what the public is saying, but I don't think that this is aligning with their values. I need to make a better case for this. How do you decide between those two things?
Yeah. So the prime opportunity, in my opinion, to be, I don't say educating the public, but bringing an issue to them in an educational type of way and explaining the merits of a complicated issue. The best time to do that is off cycle, when there's not an election, a week away, a month away. And so we should be doing that now. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that we're not, and I think we're not in a lot of ways, we need to reorient. And that's one of the major ways I think we have to reorient on these difficult issues, and something I'll do as DNC chair. But during campaign time, when you're being bludgeoned on an issue, like we were on the transgender rights conversation just a few months ago, we have to respond. Yeah. And so maybe that response isn't, pure education and informational, but we have to respond aggressively and put up, for example, in 2016, video should have been a TV ad. Donald Trump looking at a camera in North Carolina when they were debating the bathroom bill, quote unquote, in their state legislature that year. Donald Trump looked at the camera and told the world, I don't care who uses my bathrooms in Trump Tower, effectively, implicitly supporting transgender rights. Now, 8 years later, because it's politically convenient, he's attacking these neighbors of ours, these American citizens. And so, but we didn't respond at all. And that was a problem, obviously.
Yeah, one of the big things, it took me a long time to figure this out online. I would wonder, where does all of the talk about these niche issues come from? And there was this, it was like two things. One is people kind of like refusing to talk about it, but two was it wouldn't be the number of people who might support it, but they would defend the person supporting it. And so you end up in this world where there might be an insane issue about like a particular topic, and it's like, this is so niche, but there were so many people who felt like they had an obligation, some social obligation to step up and like defend this niche issue. And there are so many conversations where I'll be talking, and so it'll be like, what do you think about, like you did this and that? And I was like, I think this is really dumb. And then you just move on from it. It's very easy to say it's dumb and you move on. If the other person wants to harp on it, then they will rightfully appear obsessed. But yeah, when you run from it, I think, like you said, I don't think that voters can understand all the complex nuances of government, but I think they do feel like genuinity sometimes, and you can feel when somebody's being non-genuine, ungenuine. There's a word.
Obfuscating.
Yeah,
people can see that.
Yeah, when you're going for the DNC chair, different people are bringing different strengths. You're on a more local level coming to the DNC chair. What do you think are unique insights that you have, and how would you like to see these things filter out to the rest of the Democratic Party via the DNC chair if you were to hold that position? Yeah,
so one of the unique abilities that I bring to this race, given, again, that my perspective is there needs to be wholesale change within the DNC, that's really hard to do because you have a lot of folks who I'm referring to as status quo stakeholders within the DNC and the National Democratic Party. Some of them are consultants, some of them are longtime operatives, some of them are just, very entrenched in their ways. Some of them are DNC members, who again, don't think we need to be doing much more than tweaking around the edges. And some of them financially benefit from keeping the status quo in place. And as someone who thinks there needs to be a significant reorientation, being in the apparatus for 5, 10, 15 years, like some of my competitors, all of whom I respect, by the way, and I know you had Martin O'Malley on earlier, it's a lot harder for someone like that to tell these status quo stakeholders, no, we're not doing it this way any longer. I'll give you one example of a conversation I had a couple weeks ago with a DNC member in Arizona. She was obviously a battleground state. She was explaining to me she was getting upwards of 16 mailers a day in her mailbox. And now, granted, not all of them were from the DNC or the National Democrats. Some of them were super PACs, IEs, but many of them were. And I've run enough campaigns. I'm 8-0 in my campaigns in very red jurisdictions to know that there is nothing that 16th mailer is doing that the 15th mailer was not already doing in the 14th and the 13th. Yeah. And the reason why we're doing that is because there's some mouth to feed on the other end. Every consultant gets a 15-20% cut for every mailer, every TV ad that's produced. And a lot of these vendor contracts at the DNC, if we're being honest, are friends of a congressman or someone who's otherwise well connected. And I'm the only candidate, for example, out there saying very forcefully that if elected, I'm going to let every single vendor contract expire. No auto renewals. And for those services we need, we'll competitively rebid those contracts. And if you want to do business with the DNC, with our National Democratic Party, you're going to earn that business with honesty and by providing value, not through some special relationships that you may have in the organization. So yes, I know how to win in really tough areas. I know how to fundraise. I'm one of, if you ask around in New York, I'm one of the strongest fundraisers in New York State politics. I know how to have those conversations with donors. But importantly, I'm uniquely positioned in this race to shake up the DNC in a way that the others I don't believe can.
Have you ever had anybody from the DNC reach out, or do you get other politicians that are part of the establishment, not just on a personal level, but reach out and ask you hey, you have a lot of success, both down ballot and in a red district. What are you doing? I guess to try to take whatever's working there and then duplicate it in other places, or do you feel like the communication is kind of shoddy?
Prior to this race, no. I'm certainly having a lot of those conversations now. In New York, that I've had similar conversations with folks at the state committee in New York and sort of other elements of Democratic Party politics in the state. But nationally, no. And look, there are a lot of other folks who run federally in my area, Pat Ryan, Jared Golden in Maine. I mentioned Ruben Gallego before, Jackie Rosen, who won an important seat, re-election in Nevada. There are plenty of others who significantly overperformed the top of the ticket. So I don't own, again, this proprietary sort of secret how to be successful in difficult terrain. But of the folks running, I'm the guy who comes from that background.
One more personal question. We can talk more about the DNC stuff. Do you, when you go to run for a chair like that, do you ever worry that your constituents look at you? I've always wondered this for more local kind of races. Do you ever worry that your constituents look at you as somebody who's trying to upgrade or abandon them, or is that ever a concern where you're how to run for this and oh, you don't even want to? Yeah, I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah. So the response locally has been interesting. So I represent a little over 300,000 people. We have large state Senate districts in New York. And I was interested to see sort of what the response to this would be from my constituents. And it's been refreshing, not just Democrats who are excited that, their state senator is bringing sort of our Orange County brand of politics to the national stage, but Republicans are interested in this campaign because, look, my message is the Democratic Party needs to sort of branch out. We've got to return to the once big Democratic tent and coalition that we used to have. And amongst a lot of center and center-right voters who vote for me, they want to see the Democratic Party return to that once big coalition that some of them were a part of. And so the response has been overwhelmingly positive from the folks I represent now.
So we're not quite in New Jersey, but I feel like New Jersey was part of well, I haven't asked you your opinion on this, but I would consider it a misinformation campaign of stars being UFOs and everything. I'm assuming you don't believe that those were UFOs and you don't believe in the global fog phenomenon. Yeah. When you're talking to, I guess, more conservative voters, I have two parents, very conservative. It feels like they're on another planet sometimes. Do you feel like the information landscape is such that the Democrats need to dramatically change how they fight? Do you feel like these people are just so far in another area that they're just whatever? Or do you think that they just end up believing these things because they follow the Republican establishment for other reasons, like economic reasons or whatever else? Yeah, how do you view that, like fighting on that information battleground?
It's really hard. And like a lot of families, I was with many relatives this past holiday season. I've got some uncles in particular who are to the right of Attila the Hun, as far as I'm concerned, and got into with one of them about the January 6th pardons that are likely to be coming from Donald Trump, perhaps on day one. And, these are individuals who, as we all know, some of them literally beat up cops. And so to hear conservative Americans defend pardons like that is jarring. It's astonishing, and it's hard to even process. Given my worldview, and I think a lot of people's certainly worldview. But I'm also a subscriber to the philosophy that we should not give up on anybody. And again, we've gotten into this trap that has been set by DC consultants, I believe, when we talk about national campaigns, of don't knock on this door, knock on this door instead, skip this block, take these voters, they vote in every election. They're good, solid Democrats. Don't bother wasting time on them. These folks vote in Republican primaries, so we're unlikely to win their vote in a general election. And so don't bother calling them or knocking on their door. And we've given up on the large majority of the American electorate, in my opinion, whether it's because we're taking them for granted or have given up on them based on, walk sheets that were curated by, folks who live up in an ivory tower and have no idea what the issues are or the sentiment is in most of America. And so, I'm a believer that, look, I think we should be going on Fox News a lot more. I was on Brian Kilmeade's Fox News radio show a couple of weeks ago for 20 minutes or thereabouts, answering questions about the transgender conversation and abortion and crime and public safety and immigration. I guarantee you no other DNC chair candidate is going to be going on Brian Kilmeade's Fox News radio show. We need to have a permanent presence on these center-right and right outlets, because if voters are only hearing from one side, guess which side they're going to vote for? And so, look, are we going to win a majority of Fox News voters? No, of course not. And I'm making up numbers here, but if, let's say, 3% of Fox News viewers currently vote for our top of the ticket, if with a regular presence and getting our message out to those folks, when our message is not going to be shared with them by the anchors or, the talking heads, if we can get that 3% number up to 9%, that's a big deal. We're still getting crushed with that viewership, but that's a lot of votes that we pick up if we could even just move the needle a little bit. And so, I don't think we should write off anybody, and the next DNC chair and the next national party has to be showing up again everywhere.
So on as part of your platform, you're talking about letting a lot of vendor contracts expire and then kind of basically reestablishing relationships with people that can prove their worth essentially to the DNC. What are you looking to change? I guess, what are the big changes that you wish the DNC could make, whether under your leadership or somebody else's, that you think they need to kind of bring the Democratic Party back into some functional state?
Yeah. So, we talk a lot about the role of fundraising for the DNC chair. I think which is a very important role. It's central. But what's equally, if not more important, is where that money is going once it is raised. And I'll give you one example that I've been talking a little bit about over the past week since we released my platform. You have something called the Red State Fund within the DNC. And as the name suggests, it's extra resources for red states, which sounds wonderful. What is not so wonderful, in my opinion, maybe again as an outsider here, not part of the apparatus, is the Red State Fund consists of an extra whopping $2,500 a month two red states. And I don't know about you, but we are not rebuilding coalitions and winning statewide again in places like Iowa and Missouri and the Dakotas, places where we, not that long ago, were winning U.S. Senate seats with an extra $2,500 a month from the DNC, an organization that just this past cycle raised literally billions with a B of dollars. What's even worse is that when those red states actually pull off an upset and they make progress and rebuild a bench, they're penalized for it. So in Alaska, as many folks know who follow politics, in 2022, we won the at-large congressional seat. Mary Peltola won an upset win, and we had a wonderful, for one term, unfortunately, Democratic congresswoman from a red state, Alaska. The minute that she won that seat, the red state fund disappeared for Alaska. Because one of the criteria is that you can't have over 25% of your congressional delegation as Democrats. And in that case, you only have one congressional seat. And so they were pulled out of the red state fund. And so that's the attitude right now within the DNC. We need to very significantly resource those places that have been under-resourced for a very, very long time if we're going to expand the map. And we have to expand the map for two reasons. One, I'm sick and tired of only competing nationally in 7 states out of 50 every 4 years. And by the way, it's going to be even more challenging next time around, a couple of cycles from now, because if you look at the census projections for the next decade, states like New York and California and Illinois are going to be losing electoral college votes, and states like Texas and Florida are going to be gaining them. So the map's going to be even more challenging a couple of cycles from now. And two, specifically as it pertains to the U.S. Senate, our ceiling as Democrats is in somewhere the mid-50s range for U.S. Senate seats nationally. The Republican ceiling is somewhere in the mid-60s, and that's because of the structural advantage that they have where every state, no matter how large, gets 2 U.S. senators. We have to expand the map if we are, again, going to return to 16 years ago when we had a dominant coalition. And so that will only happen if we start resourcing more intelligently, and especially in these red and leaning red states that we are not investing in right now. But beyond that, look, I'm talking about developing new partnerships with organized labor, another example. There is no reason why the DNC should not be resourcing opportunities where we are spending millions of dollars organizing workplaces off cycle so that when we get to election time, we can turn to our allies in organized labor and lean into larger membership roles to help our candidates on cycle. We should be, look, and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about this, we need to completely turn around how we approach digital organizing as a national party. Right now, we are paying influencers and telling them what they should be telling their folks instead of, again, allowing them to be authentic and empowering them to communicate and reach their followers in a way that they best know how to do and we don't. And so there's a huge reorientation needed, not on the fundraising side, although yes, there too. You know, I don't know about you. I hate getting 18 texts a week with, red blaring siren emojis about how the world and the sky is falling if I don't chip in $5 immediately to save Kamala Harris's campaign. So yes, there's some reorientation there, but the major reorientation has to happen on the spending side of the DNC.
I wish I could remember which Congress. I don't even know if this is a local office or not because of the stuff I do online, people sign me up for random things. God, I wish I could remember this. I don't know if this is a Florida politician or what, but the emails that this person was sending out for fundraising were shameless. They were hilarious. It was like, the election is over. There is now no chance that we can win. $15 might turn this around or whatever. And it was just like the most like hardcore, like you have failed. Like this is the end. Like there's no chance that it was like, oh my God. Some of those emails are pretty funny.
But that was regular. That wasn't just like,
oh, okay. Maybe it wasn't.
Yeah. I was getting stuff like that consistently. And before this cycle, it was very rare I would get text messages, emails more often, unsolicited. I'm added to lists somehow. I'm sure millions of Americans are. And the insanity that that these communications were presenting to voters, so inauthentic, was not empowering, chip in $5. How about talk to me like I'm a human being? How about talk to me as if you want me a part of this party and to believe in what you're doing? We need to empower folks a lot more with these types of communications than we do. And by the way, they'll then be more apt to give when we ask.
Yeah, where's my Kamala trading cards and NFTs?
We should not be doing that, for the record.
True. On a grander scale, away from just process and procedure, when I think about MAGA and the Republicans, there's like a whole thing that comes to mind in terms of appearance, culture, like politics, policies, like everything. I feel like the Democratic Party, since Obama, has kind of not had that. Why do you think that is? How do you think that should change?
A lot of our brand, unfortunately, and it now has not worked 2 out of 3 times, has been just anti-Trump as a Democratic Party. And certainly we're going to see the next 4 years, the American electorate front and center. It'll be apparent to them, if it's not already, very quickly, that this is a circus, just as it was the first term. You've got a wrestling executive nominated to run our nation's education system. You have an anti-vaxxer nominated to run our nation's healthcare system. And the circus is going to be very apparent. The harm that's inflicted is going to be very apparent. And certainly the next DNC chair, the National Democratic Party, has to underscore that circus and that harm that's being inflicted at every opportunity. But we cannot just be the anti-Trump party. We've relied way too much on that over the past 3 national election cycles. And so, we have to present an affirmative, inspirational vision to the American electorate in a way that, we just haven't, quite frankly, leaned enough into over the past 8 to 10 years since Trump entered the national scene. And so, that's something that I'm going to be very focused on as the next DNC chair.
I feel like one of the problems has been with communicating victories. It seems like the Republicans can communicate victories even when they've had none. Somehow they can take credit for things that they either haven't done or things that just haven't happened. And it seems like Democrats can't take credit for the things they even have done without being patronizing or out of touch, right? Like in this current environment, even ignoring like recent news, it feels like it would be insane for a Democrat to come out and say like, hey, well, the ACA helped get more people insured in pre-existing conditions. That's better, right? Like everybody would look at you like you're insane. Like, well, we're not happy with the cost of health. We're not. How can the Democratic Party, do you think, signal better on communicating victories without seeming to be out of touch?
That's a great question. And I don't think communicating victories at all leads to being out of touch. People want to hear about what you're doing. And it's something that I do every single day. I communicate where I am, what I'm doing, the bills I'm passing, the debates I'm involved in, the committee work that I'm engaged in. And certainly, I think there's an expectation. It's not, braggadocious. It's not flaunting. People want to know, we elected you. What are you doing for us? And, people don't know, for example, that just a few days ago, insulin and a lot of other prescriptions and medicine was capped as a result of what Democrats in Congress and Joe Biden did. People have no idea. And so, we absolutely do have to be better communicators about what we accomplish. And I want to circle back to your previous question real quick too. One of the things that has obviously coalesced when it comes to MAGA and that culture is that is a personality cult that has developed. We don't want to do that as Democrats. First of all, I don't think there is any one personality that we could do that around. But even if there was, we don't want to become that. But there's no question that the Republican Party recently has out-organized us in a lot of ways. And we'll talk a lot more about this, I assume. But I was speaking with some folks in Ohio, for example, not that long ago, who explained, obviously there was a big U.S. Senate race there. Sherrod Brown, who's one of my favorite senators, lost re-election because, quite frankly, the state has just turned so far to the right over the past several cycles. But something that was eye-opening to me was there were Republicans who were paying young gamers to, while they're engaged in their massive multiplayer online gaming, Call of Duty, whatever it was, in the chat rooms of these games, they were being paid to shit talk Sherrod Brown.
Okay.
So they're running laps around us when it comes to these creative tactics, these innovative ways to reach voters. And look, that comes from, this sort of MAGA, I think, attitude of like, we're going to do what we want anywhere we want. And by the way, the RNC and the Republican Party, they're funding these efforts. They have a Turning Point USA that trains young people to go out and do things like that. We need, and by the way, these graduates of Turning Point USA, they're quite frankly, a lot of them, they're young jerks who like flaunt around this sort of like misogyny and these other terrible traits. But we need an equivalent that's not jerky, but an equivalent that's training young Democrats to go out and organize in every single corner of this country. We don't have that right now. That's part of their political culture, their MAGA culture. But at the center of it is a cult of personality. We don't want that.
One of the things that's challenging to me when I look at these environments is that I try to think of a lot of the things that you're thinking of, like, well, what can we do better? How do we signal better? How do we train these people? How do we do all these things? And then I look to the conservative side and I think, like, after 2020, were they having these conversations? And it feels like they weren't. It feels like they just like continued to trudge forward. And because of the cult of personality, all of these things just kind of organically develop in service of worshiping Trump or worshiping MAGA or whatever. Do you think that at some point there is some structural stuff that has to change? On the grander scale, this would be like Supreme Court composition of like 9 judges, or Senate composition, or integrating DC or Puerto Rico, or challenging issues like gerrymandering. At what point, like, do you think that the Democratic Party should continue to fight or should fight structurally on those things? Or I know that you said we can't do a cult of personality. What are the big battles that the DNC needs to have, like to like actually move, I guess, like the culture media landscape back in that direction? Like, I guess, like, to summarize this in a single question, people kept saying, like, why didn't Kamala Harris go on Joe Rogan? And my counter question was always like, why was the expectation that Kamala should have to go on Joe Rogan? Why was nobody saying, like, why didn't Donald Trump go on, whatever left-leaning show, right? It's not even the expectation of it,
Well, to be clear, Joe Rogan voted for Democratic, top of the tickets in the past too. So I don't want to box in like, oh, we didn't talk to these right leaning outlets.
Sure.
We had some missed opportunities, but the list that you just rattled off of big fights, I support most of those, if not all of those issues and fights. But none of it matters if you don't win.
Yeah.
You're not going to restructure the Supreme Court. You're not going to provide DC statehood and Puerto Rico statehood if you don't win elections again. And so I think the structural reform has to be on the political side first. Yes, let's talk about these things, but let's also not mislead voters and Democrats and the American electorate to believe that any of this is achievable if we don't start winning big again as Democrats. And many of those things are going to require 60 votes in the U.S. Senate. And as it pertains right now, the map does not allow for that. I am very focused on, as a DNC chair candidate, how do we get back to winning? And, the Democrats writ large have stopped winning in communities like mine. I know how to win in these types of communities, and that's why I'm running.
I'll be honest, I don't know anything about or prior to this, I didn't know anything about like the DNC chair or anything, because it's just not a very visible race. I imagine that some of the criticism that you've either already faced or will face in the future is going to be, okay, sure, upstate New York. I'm just kidding. Parts of New York or whatever. Sure, in your.
We'll just say the Hudson Valley. Upstate, yeah. Downstate, it's very country.
No, I know. I'm sure. Yeah. So some parts of New York, sure, and you can do good here, sure, but you don't have the national level experience. You wouldn't be able to know what it's like to hold on to like a border district, like on the southern border, or to maintain, like different voter bases that represent different demographics that you don't have in your district. What do you think are like big experiences, or I don't want to say collaboration, such an all word, like meeting of the minds that you've had with people in different districts? What do you think are lessons that you've learned from other people, or how would you counter that sort of criticism that you wouldn't be able to represent the DNC on a national level? Yeah,
to be clear, this is not a one-man show here. Yes, there's a single DNC chair, but you've got 448 members of the DNC, and then certainly thousands of party faithful that are in the trenches in these communities you're talking about that are not in the Hudson Valley in New York State where I represent. And look, one of the, I think, important qualities that any chair would have to bring to this organization is to empower and leverage the talent that exists within our Democratic Party. And right now we're not doing that. And so I can't tell you, of the 448 DNC members, and I've spoken with hundreds of them at this point, the vast majority, not 50%, not 60%, the vast majority of the DNC members I've spoken to have no idea how the decisions are made at the DNC. They're preordained and then rubber stamped by committees, have no idea where money is flowing from the DNC to vendors and to other campaign efforts. And quite frankly, they're told to show up to a few meetings every year and vote on predetermined decisions that were made by a very small circle of DNC members and staff. And so, one of the things that I'm very committed to, that I would hope that any DNC candidate running is committed to, is we've got this enormous pool of talent within our organization. Use them. They want to be contributors to our National Democratic Party. Right now, many of them are not. And so, of course, I'm not going to know every aspect, every nuance of every political dynamic in every corner of the country. No one is. Whether you're a state chair, we've got a couple of state chairs who are running in this race. Whether you're a former governor, we've got one of them running in this race. No one's going to be able to come to the table and know every facet of every issue in every corner of the country. But there are people there who do. And we should not be parachuting consultants and operators like we do from DC, poli-sci majors who recently graduated and expect them to be organizing in border states. We need to be resourcing folks on the ground, supporting those who do.
How obstinate do you think Democrats should be on the lawmaking level when it comes to, I guess, being obstructionist towards Republican ends? Like the hard question would be, like if it came time to confirm another Supreme Court justice and the Democrats had a majority in the Senate, do you think the Democrats should be fighting tooth and nail on every single issue, like when it comes to governing? Or I know this is a little bit outside of the DNC question. I'm just curious how you feel like what should the Democrat role be in the Republican administration?
Yeah, Democrats are not and should not be obstructionist. We should deeply oppose those nominees, those measures that deserve deep opposition. I'm sure there are going to be the very occasional times where, because even a broken clock is right twice a day, there are going to be occasional times where, there might be an agency that is looking to advance a priority that we have long held as Democrats. One example, RFK said the other day that he wants to ban TV advertisements from Big Pharma. That's something that a lot of Democrats have talked about for years, if not decades. That's a great idea. We'd love to embrace that. But most of the stuff that's going to come out of this administration is not going to align with our values. And of course, we should be deeply oppositional. We're the opposition party right now.
True, yeah. I try to ask Martin O'Malley this, and he didn't want to answer, so I understand if you're saving this for the future. But I guess in your first 100 days as DNC chair, what are like the big immediate things that you feel like you can do to have an impact on how the DNC operates? You can just say one or two things if you don't want to reveal that all if you're saving that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. Mm-hmm. So look, some of the easy stuff, and I think there are two spaces here. There's organizationally, structurally within the DNC itself, and then there's sort of the outward-looking reform that I think is needed. And so within the DNC itself, there's plenty of low-hanging fruit. And it begins, again, by bringing some transparency to the organization, making sure that the 448 members actually know what's going on and they're involved and they're participating and that we empower their talents. Making sure, for example, right now, one of the in the weeds sort of nuances of the chair's power is out of the 448 members, the chair effectively gets to appoint 75 of them. And it would not surprise you that historically, the large majority of these 75 appointments are really insidery folks, longtime operatives. Some of them are consultants. Some guy who worked in the Clinton White House 30 years ago that we think we owe a favor to so he could have a nice title. I'm not going to do that. And those 75 members are going to be appointments that help address, smooth over inequities that exist within the broader 448 members. So, for example, there's a huge underrepresentation of young Democrats within the 448. They should get some of those appointments. But more interestingly is the key committees. So the 75 make up about 17% of the broader membership. The key committees, those 75, make up 60+% of those committee seats. And that's why there's rubber stamping, by the way. And so, that type of stuff, ending that type of stuff, that I believe is the low-hanging fruit. We want to empower the full membership. But some of the first things that I would do as DNC chair is I'd be going to those folks, those stakeholder groups, those leaders who were once under our big Democratic tent and now are on the outside looking in. I want to meet with the Teamsters Union. I want to meet with the Firefighters Union. I want to go to Michigan and sit down with the leadership of the Arab American communities. I want to go to the Orthodox leaders throughout the country. I want to go to the college campuses where we've lost trust with the National Democratic Party. I represent, by the way, 40,000 Orthodox Jews. They voted for me. They have lost trust. They endorsed Donald Trump. And if you look at the precinct data, that's not an exaggeration, 99% of the Orthodox Jews in Orange County, where I represent, voted for Donald Trump. And so I'm going to go to these folks and explain to them, this is a new Democratic Party. We want you back under our tent. It's going to take some time to rebuild the trust. It's not going to take 1 day or 10 days or even 100 days, but it starts by reopening that door and telling folks, we respect you. We're not going to agree with you on every issue. We respect you, your worldview. We want you back under the tent, and we're going to try and earn your trust again.
What do you think are lessons that can be learned from how the Republican establishment has ran, I guess, Trump as a candidate and all the people around him? So whether lessons from the RNC or just Trump's campaign in and of itself?
I think, again, not to be a broken record, but authenticity matters a lot. And yes, there's a role for the DNC to help guide candidates into, how to present the most salient messages, what, perhaps positions are worth being mindful of in particular districts. But at the end of the day, we need real people running authentic campaigns. And, Donald Trump, he's literally a felon. He's a liar. He's someone that, no one can trust. Even Republicans would say this, by the way. No one can trust as far as one can throw him. People are fearful, the next tweet might sink the stock market. Yeah. And so but people were able to look past all of those things because I think in large part he was authentic. That's something that we have to start doing a lot more of as Democrats.
Something that was very frustrating to me is Kamala seemed very careful in all the speaking that she did. And I just assume that maybe she's just kind of stiff or maybe that's just how she is. I wish I could remember exactly where, but I have seen her at points where she seems like more relaxed and she's just chill. And I'm like, I wish you could just do this a little bit more. It feels like Democrats from a politician standpoint, and then this extends all the way out to the, obviously I'm very aware of this, to the media sphere standpoint, are like, I don't want to say focus tested, but they're very, very, very cautious. And it was funny to me to see in this election cycle and all the prior election cycles of my lifetime, the Democrats are so scared of touching anything that is like even remotely hot. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is jumping onto like streams of people that I've personally known that have been just insanely crazy lunatic people. Yeah, geez. Do you think there's an appetite for that to change? You talked earlier about like the consultant class and like all the vendors and everything. And I feel like, and I'm sympathetic toward you saying that there's just a lot of people who have been getting paid or whatever. But I view it a lot also as like, this is a thing that's worked in the past. And if it fails, at least we can say, well, it worked in the past. Whereas if you try something new and it fails, that's horrifying, and nobody wants to take responsibility for that. So, yeah, how do you push, or do you see an appetite even for the DNC and the Democratic Party in general to move a little bit more into the 21st century of media engagement? Yeah,
we can't. We've got to stop focus grouping every word that comes out of candidates' mouths, and not everyone does it, but many do. And the only thing politically that's worse than taking a side on a very controversial, divisive issue is taking no side on an issue that's top of mind for voters. And the perfect example is the conflict in Gaza. And I know you have very strong feelings about this.
Yeah,
I know
do.
a lot of folks have very strong feelings about this.
Real quick, I'm so sorry. I laugh because it's funny. The best message that I heard, I didn't really hear it. I don't know how this would work with the American people, but one of the funniest things I saw was, I don't know if this came from a Woodward Reporter book or something, but it was that Biden supposedly behind the scenes had said something along the lines of like, in reference to Mahmoud Abbas and Netanyahu, he's like, these are two of the biggest fucking assholes in the Middle East. That was funny to me. And seeing him characterize it that way, as opposed to the insane tightrope walking, my God, that Biden and Kamala had to do. It would have been a little bit more real. Yeah.
That's my point. The National Party on an issue like this, and this is not the only issue, was spending a lot more time than we should have walking on eggshells and being so careful to not say the wrong word that'll piss off the wrong, category of voters. And in the meantime, it gets back to a point we made before. Voters can tell when you're obfuscating, when you're dodging. And so what happened on that issue is we pissed off everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody, from the Orthodox Jews I mentioned before to the college campus activists to the Arab American communities. And I'll tell you, and I've heard this subsequent to the election, that the uncommitted faction in Minnesota and the upper Midwest in particular, they were back channeling to the national Democrats, just throw us a bone. We want to vote for you. Just throw us a bone. Be empathetic. Do something. Give us a reason to go back to our folks. And, we were just walking on eggshells for months and months and months and pissed off everybody.
Yeah, it's one of the most frustrating things is seeing the Democrats get it from all sides. And it's like, Jews obviously don't trust you in the United States right now. You've got all of your people in Dearborn and Michigan are not very happy. All the college kids are not happy. Like, take a position or take a side on something and be a little bit more firm about it, and understand that maybe some people won't be happy with it, but like at least you've established an actual position, and somebody is going to
meaningfully engage.
Yeah.
Meaningfully engage.
Yeah. It was so frustrating to see candidates getting hammered simultaneously for being transphobic, but also like bringing all the transfers to everybody. Yeah, these multiple things is it's very frustrating. And then when I think back to like any highlight moment, like it was always like the kind of the more candid moments, whether even of Biden, it was like always the more candid moments that kind of stood out more than just than the speeches or the
people are craving that candid, authentic presentation from their elected officials.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Anything else you want to bring up relating to DNC chair stuff?
Look, the only thing I'll mention is just sort of the state of the race right now. Because to your point, I think the vast majority of Americans, this is not something that people follow closely. They don't really, many of them know sort of how this works, and so it's a super truncated campaign, as I'm sure you know by this point. But for your viewers, the election's on February 1st. And the field obviously formed after the November 5th election. So we're talking literally a couple of months here, basically, of a race. It's a very unusual, it's easily the most unusual election I've ever run. I've run in high school class elections with a larger electorate than the DNC's 448 members, and everyone's got very different backgrounds. There are some of the 448 consultant operative types, especially that list of 75 appointments I mentioned before. Every state chair is a voting member. Every state vice chair of the Democratic committee in that state is a voting member. Then you've got reformer types. You've got, folks who are very liberal, are very conservative within the big Democratic tent. You've got red state Democrats who are, sort of rank and file and, are looking to a message, quite frankly, like mine, that's leaning into, empowering red state Democrats, and certainly coming from a Trump district helps. And so you've got a lot of different people, I think, probably when they think, oh, it's a DNC election, they're all insiders, they're all, participating in these smoke-filled back rooms, making decisions. There are a couple of folks like that amongst the 448, but the large majority, it's a disparate bunch. And coming into this, I own this characterization. I'm the outsider in this race. I don't come from the DNC world. I'm not part of the apparatus like some of the others for 5, 10, 15 years. And I'm employing that as a positive in my conversations. And it's resonating with most, not all, obviously, but with most of the DNC members, to the point where right now I have a high level of confidence that despite 8 weeks ago, nobody outside of New York State knowing who the hell I was, and having lots of introductory conversations and meetings flying around the country over the past couple of months, I feel that high level of confidence I'm polling ahead of, all due respect to him, former Governor Martin O'Malley, who has been involved in Democratic politics for many decades. And so we're building support very rapidly, and we're playing catch up in a lot of ways, because there are folks who came into this race with a list as long as my arm of DNC relationships from 10 plus years of being in the apparatus. But it's a sprint now. We're in the final 3 to 4 weeks. There are going to be 4 DNC sort of official forums. You needed 40 signatures from DNC members to qualify. We very quickly qualified. And then there are lots of other sort of forums and quasi debates that are happening from DNC councils and caucuses and outside groups. And so there's going to be a lot to pay attention to over the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then it's over.
This is a really random race. What was the moment that you were like, I want to run for the DNC chair? What was that? What was that like? Yeah.
Never in a million years prior to November 6th, the day after the election, did I think I'd be running for something like this. While I have a very good relationship with my state committee and state party chairman in New York, I'm not a party officer in New York State. I woke up the days subsequent to the election, like a lot of Democrats did, with viscerally strong feelings about where our party needed to head from here. And this is not cliche. This is I internalized this for about a week or so after the election. Where do we go from here? And certainly given my district and how I performed and how Trump performed, I had a certain backdrop with that internalization. I think a lot of folks probably don't have, and how can I best contribute to that conversation, to that what I hope will be a reorientation, and as I thought more and more about it, and obviously talked with folks on my team, my family, about, one, should I do this? 1, 2, can I do this? We decided, let's try and do this. And so here we are now, about 2 months, a little less than 2 months later from when I made my decision. And the conversation has been very interesting because it has sort of morphed into, this isn't a left moderate ideological battle within the chair's race at all, which I think is healthy, because if I'm successful, if anyone's successful, we are not, or we should not be, imposing our ideology on the DNC and the National Democratic Party. The exclusive focus ought to be rebuilding a coalition, right, and winning elections. But the schism has been more of a inside versus outside type of paradigm, and certainly I'm in the outside lane and making the case to DNC members that at this moment in time, when I believe and most people believe we need a major shakeup within the DNC, you're best suited to see that shakeup if it's an aggressive outsider who knows how to win, not someone who's been part of the organization, part of that apparatus for over a decade.
Okay. You talk a lot about being genuine and kind of that voters are able to perceive that. When we were in the back room earlier, you said you grew up on the N64, but you have a Breath of the Wild sweater on. Can you explain the discrepancy there?
Well, so I have a Switch now. And I'm glad you brought it up, because there are probably a lot of viewers who can't see the sweatshirt I'm wearing and think like, oh, who's this fool running for DNC chair wearing a sweatshirt? But certainly, no, these are the divine beasts from Breath of the Wild. I am a huge Zelda fan. I grew up on N64, GoldenEye, Smash, Mario Kart were my big 3 that I played with friends most often, but even still, I do a little bit of gaming here and there. I big Zelda fan, but probably the best game I've played recently, not Nintendo, was Baldur's Gate 3 this past year. So I still dabble a little bit, and worth this for you. Okay,
well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. If people want to support you or find out more about your platform or information or anything else, where should they go?
Skoufis4dnc.com, but certainly I'm also all over social media.
Cool. Is there anything else? We're not like on a hard out unless you are. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up or anything related to DNC race, local race, native politics? Yeah. What? Yeah.
The only other thing I'll mention, and again, thank you for having me. This has been a great opportunity. Is we also need a generational change within our Democratic Party leadership, and that's not to say we throw everyone who's over 40, 50 years old to the curb.
Just like half of them. No, I'm just kidding.
But we need to have more folks in leadership who knows what TikTok is and knows what streaming is and would be able to themselves not just deploy others, but themselves be able to go to college campuses and go into some of these meeting rooms and be able to speak in language and connect with that 18 to 35-year-old cohort that has been drifting away from our party and feels disconnected from the Democratic Party of 2024.
One of the frustrating things is when people learn a particular social thing, like phenomenon, but they don't apply it evenly to other areas. One thing that I feel like the left understands better than the right is the concept of representation, right? That it's important to have people that look like you or come from similar backgrounds in media, in professions, because it inspires you to aspire to those positions. And yeah, when I think of the Democratic Party, I'm thinking like 85-year-old person, and it's like, how is it surprising that young people don't want to participate as much?
Surprise.
Yeah.
And the other part of this, and this comes with having a generational change, is we need to, as National Democrats, start empowering and respecting young voters again. Quite frankly, and I'll be blunt, we have disrespected them. Not only do they not have a seat at the table, we've disrespected them. You know how many youth arms of the DNC and the National Democratic Party we have? We've got the High School Democrats of America, Young Democrats of America, College Democrats of America. Within the DNC, we've got a youth council within the Democratic National Committee. And do you know what the budget line items are for any or all those groups? $0 and 0 cents. And we are not empowering them to do anything. And at a juncture where we see the bleeding, we see the hemorrhaging among that age cohort, this is the opportunity to, yes, as a 37-year-old, I'm going to do everything I can to myself go out and, as a relatively young leader in our party, do what I can to rebuild those bridges, but I can't do it alone. And quite frankly, there are people even better suited than someone who's 37 years old to do this. We need to empower these groups and individuals who are in our party, who feel completely disconnected from our strategic vision and decision making, and certainly are not provided the resources to do anything. We force the DNC members from these groups to, out of their pockets, fly to the meetings, the DNC meetings, and to pay for hotels. These are college kids. They don't have the resources themselves to do that. Never mind to actually rebuild our party with our young college students and other young Democrats. And so, that's the last thing, and maybe the most appropriate way to conclude this interview is we need a generational change within our party too. And I like to think in this race, at least, I represent that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I agree with the resource allocation as well, that, Republicans are ahead of the game because they don't even provide just their own resources. They've even got Russia providing some of them. So just kidding. But no, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And maybe we'll chat again in the future. Yeah.
That'd be great.